Hey everyone, Richard Dawkins made a bit of a stir this week by some comments he made on LBC Radio. It's a talk radio show in London. He basically said, considers himself a cultural Christian, and he made some criticisms about Islam. Now, I'm going to look at the reaction of two Muslims, one Mohammed Hijab, who we all know very well, but I'm going to start with Mehdi Hasan, who styles himself as a journalist, but he just comes across as any typical Dawa apologist in this follow-up interview that LBC did with them. So let's take a look.
And now I'm joined by Mehdi Hasan, who's a journalist, editor-in-chief and CEO of the new media company Zateo. Mehdi, thank you for joining me. Tell me what you thought when you heard that clip.
Right, so I presume that they started off by playing the short interview that Richard Dawkins had when he went on LBC. And it's typical for these kind of talk shows. It's like, well, we know absolutely nothing about Islam. So we'll bring on somebody like Mehdi Hasan, who's basically just going to lie and distort about things to show that, oh, look, we're really balanced on this. It would be really nice, once in a while, maybe if they got an ex-Muslim voice rather than someone who's been playing professional victim over criticism of Islam for the last 20 years. But let's see what he's got to say.
Thanks, Anishka, for having me. I thought a lot of things. I mean, me and Richard Dawkins go way back. We've been sparring for over a decade. I interviewed him on my then Al Jazeera show back in 2012 about religion.
Yeah, I mean, that is the only contact that I'm aware that you had with him. You say you're sparring for a decade, maybe just in your head. But I think a lot of us will remember that show where you made a complete fool of yourself talking about how it's perfectly reasonable for you to believe that Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse. So, yeah. You probably feel some resentment towards Richard Dawkins for making you look like a bit of a wally.
And a few things come to mind. Number one, for years, his supporters and he told me and others, we don't hate Islam. We're not picking on Islam. We hate all religions. And people.
Well, I doubt he said he probably hated any religion. He probably said that he thought each religion was untrue, which I'm sure is still his position. But as I take the position, not all religions are equal. And I think some deserve more criticism, whether it's based on the textual doctrine or what the current adherents to those religions actually believe, do, and say.
Like we would say, not sure we believe you. And I think there was confirmation of that on Sunday with Rachel Johnson, where he made it very clear. He likes Christianity a lot. He doesn't like Islam a lot. So I'm glad that.
Well, again, I think he's more talking about the manifestation. I mean, he's talking about the average UK Christian who's going to be, either a Church of England or possibly Catholic. And they're Christian in the modern sense that they're going to have largely rejected kind of the Old Testament stuff. And they're just going to be, Jesus is love and all that kind of stuff. And so he's sort of talking from that point of view. Obviously, it was some 14th century medieval Christian going around doing some kind of witch burning or something, then yeah, he's not going to be talking about that kind of Christian, is he? But he's kind of looking at that kind of modern Christian in the UK and comparing it to many of the modern Muslims in the UK who want to do things like impose sharia or criminalize homosexuality or kill apostates, etc. Yes, he's noticing that there's a bit of a difference between those two stances.
Cat's out of the bag. Finally, it's taken about 12 years for people to catch up. I would also say I wasn't surprised by what he said because I've been following his career and he's been very anti-Islam for a while. This is a man who's called Islam.
So hang on a minute, you just contradicted yourself there. You just acted as if this is the first time he's ever criticized Islam, and then you admit that he's been critiquing the Islamic doctrine and the impact of Islam for many, many years. So which is it, Mehdi? Did it just reveal himself? He was this sly person hiding his animosity towards Islam, or has he been doing it for all these years, which you've been following him? It can't be both, my friend.
I'm a cancer who said Islam is the greatest force for evil in the world. He says in that clip, I distinguish between Islam and Muslims, but of course, he's also said stuff like,
Well, that's important, isn't it? I mean, I do that all the time, and it's true. I mean, you get many, many Muslims around the world who are perfectly good, decent people. And particularly if they don't take the religion all that seriously, if they're cultural Muslims or if they, they'll just do the kind of Ramadan stuff and go to the mosque once in a while and spend time with their families at religious holidays. That kind of Muslim will just get on with things and they're perfectly decent. But when you start to get into the hardcore Orthodox traditionalist Muslims, yeah, then you see the same problems raising their head all over the fucking world.
Who the hell do these Muslims think they are? He wants.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's, completely out of context, isn't it? There could be something perfectly reasonable to back that statement up. For example, you've got a bunch of Salafis calling for Sharia in the UK. to overthrow the system and impose a religious tyranny, then yes, I would say for those Muslims, who the hell do you think you are? So, just throwing these words in there without any context, that's not dishonest at all, is it?
Called for me to be fired from the New Statesman because I believe in Islamic beliefs, which he then had to retract and apologize.
Well, I mean, you shouldn't be fired for that. You should be fired for impersonating a journalist because you're not actually one.
Apologize for. So he has a long history. He has form on this subject, Anishka. The third.
Right, so he's got a long history of it, yet all suddenly the cat's out the bag. So you're just talking absolute fucking nonsense.
The thing I'd say is the number of falsehoods in that entire exchange. Since when is Ramadan being promoted over Easter? Where's the evidence for that? There's zero evidence of that.
Well, again, I'm not sure it's promoted over Easter, but it's certainly way more prominent. I mean, apart from, chocolate eggs in the supermarkets and stuff like that, I mean, there isn't really anything to Easter at the moment. And yet, yes, you have demonstrations of Ramadan all over the place.
LBC in its tweet yesterday referred to Easter lights not being up, but Ramadan lights being up. I haven't lived in the UK for 9 years, Anushka, but I did live there for 36 years before then. I don't remember seeing any Easter lights at Oxford Street.
That's a very...
Yeah, that's really funny, isn't it? I mean, pick on one bad tweet that LBC has put out, and that suddenly discredits the whole idea that Ramadan is far more prominent than Easter this year. I mean, it's so cheap.
Very good point. What are Easter lights?
I know they're Christmas lights. I don't know what Easter lights are. So this is a bit of a fake row.
No, this is a fake point that you do. And it's just this typical kind of mainstream journalism, let's undermine some, to pretend you can undermine somebody's point with some fucking triviality like that.
It's a private endeavor. It's not from the government. It's not from Mayor Khan. It's not from the GLA. And look, why aren't we celebrating all religions? Well,
I mean, as an atheist, I don't particularly feel like celebrating any religion, but obviously I respect the right of people to do that. But it's like, how far is it crossing a line? There's celebrating your religion is one thing. Wanting it to dominate and push out other religions are different. And while I'm not saying that all Muslims are like that, there are plenty in the country who would like to see that situation, and that needs to be challenged.
Jewish cousins had Hanukkah in Trafalgar Square in December. There was a massive menorah and Hanukkah lights.
Oh, God, yeah. Let's get into the bullshit personal anecdote part of the interview, as if this matters.
Number one, great. I love it. We should have more of that. Number two, I don't remember Richard Dawkins or others in the right-wing media kicking up a fuss about that. And if Jeremy Corbyn had come out and said, I'm very unhappy about this menorah display in Trafalgar Square, you and your colleagues, Anushka, would rightly be all over him. So why are we not criticizing Richard Dawkins for this? Because Islamophobia is much more acceptable these days, sadly.
Oh, yeah, here we are, the professional victim. I mean, you've been doing this for how many decades now? Anytime there's any critique of Islam, anytime there's any worry about its potential negative influence, you cry Islamophobia. I mean, seriously, what is the point of view?
And any other kind of bigotry towards religious communities.
Well, what do you...
It's not bigotry to recognize that there are problems with Islamic doctrine and how a significant number of Muslims believe in some really regressive things that come out of those doctrines. That is a reasonable concern, and it's something that you constantly dodge because you're a hypocrite.
I actually think it means to talk about cultural Christianity in that way, because one of the things I find is you can have...
I mean, look at that little smarmy look on his face, like cultural Christianity. Now, I mean, from my point of view, I don't really see this whole thing of doing this cultural Christianity thing as a bulwark against Islam. I really think the issues are far larger than that. I think we need to get away from all kinds of regressive ideologies, but certainly Islam is top of the tree on this.
Have a conversation about religion, and I quite enjoyed his book, The God Delusion. But there is a separate conversation, and that's about what people are like in their normal lives. And
no, this is not a separate conversation because, as I say, we can all come up with personal anecdotes. Nobody is saying that every Muslim is a problem in the UK, or even most. I mean, most people will know Muslims who are completely cool in their personal life. Nobody doubts that.
I was actually following an MP, Dawn Butler, around recently because I'm doing a thing about MPs getting attacked much more. And
I mean, that's an interesting thing to bring up, isn't it? I mean, considering the recent death threats against many members of Parliament, we've got MPs resigning. We had an MP murdered by a Islamist only a couple of years ago. You want to mention any of that in this little anecdote?
was at a mosque and Sadiq Khan was there and the local rabbi was there, and Jewish people and Muslim people were just living side by side, living their lives. And the depiction that you sometimes get of what it might be like to be a Muslim or to be a Jew just doesn't exist, as far as I can tell.
Oh, yeah. So you stood on the pavement for 5 minutes for a photo opportunity with Sadiq Khan and whoever else showed up at this mosque. And that suddenly gives you an insight into the average lives of people. I mean, this is so asinine. This is so childish, this fucking analysis.
People's ordinary lives.
Yeah, and a couple of things. Just before I answer your question about cultural Christianity, let's be very clear about the Islamophobia here. This is not a coincidence. People are attacking Sadiq Khan for being the Muslim mayor of London, including his Tory rival. You have a Muslim...
Well, I don't think people are attacking him for being Muslim. I mean, there probably are some people who are doing that, but most people will criticize him for various policies and things like that. And if you're referring to the recent situation where there was another MP that said that Islamists had taken over London, yeah, I thought that was a pretty silly statement to make. But you can certainly see the influence of Islamists when they have managed to alter parliamentary procedures by getting them to debate a bill over Gaza. And how did they do that? Because there were death threats sent to a bunch of Labour MPs. So while to lay this blame at any individual politician is obviously silly, in my opinion, but to say that there isn't a disturbing influence under the threat of violence, which is now even affecting our democracy in a real way, to not acknowledge that would, again, you're just dodging, you're just running interference for extremists.
First Minister of Scotland. You do have a lot of mosques being built, as Rachel ominously referred to in that clip, and people get very upset with change. They don't like the idea.
Well, it depends what the changes are. That's the whole point, isn't it? I mean, change in itself is not a bad thing. But if the change is basically, yes, the religious tone of the country is becoming more aggressive, more authoritarian, more people calling for some kind of tyrannical authoritarian religious state, which is, let's be honest, only happening from certain parts of the Muslim community in the UK, then yeah, people have got a right to be fucking worried about that kind of change.
Idea of, oh, Muslims are coming, Sharia law takeover, all this nonsense that right-wing media has fed over the years.
I mean, two things there. Number one, it's not nonsense. I mean, there is plenty of good polling data to show that there is, a worrying amount of support for introducing Islamic law, even amongst British Muslims, British-born Muslims. But also this idea it's like a right-wing conspiracy. I mean, this guy loves to sort of act as if like he's some sort of, liberal left-wing kind of journalist. It's like, yeah, when did that happen? When you joined MSNBC? Before that, I can remember you writing a snivelling, grovelling letter to the Daily Mail saying how much your principles aligned with them. And for those who don't know, Daily Mail is like a right-wing newspaper in the UK. And the fact is, you were previously, there's footage of you calling non-Muslims, animals and pigs and whatever. So, you seem to have flirted with this kind of Islamist mentality yourself. So, like, for you to then go, oh, this kind of right-wing propaganda, it's like, well, what politics do you hold? Basically, whatever's convenient at the moment.
Kit Kat's been attacked recently for doing something about Ramadan in the UK. It's all very, this is not a coincidence. As for cultural Christianity, Richard Dawkins trying to have his cake and eat it. As you say, he wrote The God Delusion.
How was he trying to have his cake and eat it over cultural Christianity? He said for the longest time that, yes, he acknowledges and accepts that Christianity is formed part of the cultural makeup of the country for 1,000 years or more. And there are certain positive aspects of that in terms of architecture and hymn singing and other traditions which are still quite nice to carry forward, even though he's an atheist. There's no contradiction with that. There's nothing wrong with looking at your cultural heritage and saying, okay, some bits are good and some aren't. So that smarmy look on your face is, again, the hypocrisy.
Years attacking organized religion, and now he says, well, I quite like the bits that involve singing and architecture. Those bits can we keep? Well, first of all, again, I question the premise. He says, I don't want to lose.
Why do you question the premise? It is not that difficult to say that there are some bits of the tradition that you enjoy. I like putting a Christmas tree up. I like Christmas lights. Does that make me a hypocrite? No, it doesn't, because I'm not saying that I believe in Christianity. I'm just saying that this is a nice ritual. So again, where's the hypocrisy?
Our cathedrals. Are we losing cathedrals, Anushka? I don't live in the UK. You work.
Yeah, you don't live in the UK, so you don't know shit. But again, Dawkins didn't actually say that we were losing cathedrals. He said if we were to, that would be sad because many of them are extremely beautiful buildings, and it also represents part of your history. Whether you actually are a Christian or not, you still recognise it as that's part of where we come from. Even if you're going to move beyond the religious beliefs, you can still respect that.
For ITV News, have you done a breaking news story about cathedrals being dismantled in front of?
Oh, straw man, stupid, smarmy little fucking, this is the level of commentary. And, the LBC host there laughing away as if this is some kind of clever point. Yet you can do all this distraction and avoid actually talking about the worries that people genuinely have about Islam.
I quite like cathedrals too. By the way, I'm more pro-Christianity than he is. I love Jesus.
Right, and this is the bit that just shows that he really is no different to somebody like Mohammed Hijab or Ali Dawa. He's now going to use this tire trope of saying, oh no, Muslims love Jesus, so therefore, we're pro-Christian. No, the very central tenet of Christianity is basically said is a lie within Islamic doctrine. You're saying, therefore, Jesus is not the Son of God. It was a lie that he was crucified. This is not you loving Jesus. This is you or being pro-Christian. This is you being completely anti-Christian, which is a central tenet of the Christian faith. Now, I don't personally care either way, but the way that Muslims deliberately lie in the way that they portray this issue is sickening, and he is no different to Mohammed Hijab.
I'm totally for Christians going to church. He's the one who spent years attacking religion, and now he's like, well, people don't go to church and churches are empty. Whose fault is that, Richard Dawkins? Maybe it's yours. Maybe you should look in the mirror about why people aren't turning up to church. I don't see why Muslims get blamed for Christians not turning up to church anymore.
No one's blaming Muslims. No one has mentioned Muslims are at fault for Christians not going to church or people leaving Christianity. That is a complete fucking straw man once again. All he's pointing out is that where Christianity has withdrawn, if it is replaced by Islam, particularly the kind of Islam that we see today, is that a worry? Then I would say yes. I mean, if you're going to compare the two, I would say the current modern day average Christian in the UK is far more compatible with getting on with everybody else than I would say the average Islamic beliefs are.
I find that very odd.
And do you worry about the kind of state of debate around the UK at the moment when it comes to being Muslim?
It's very, very worrying. Everyone I speak to in the UK, from what I'm watching from afar, it's very worrying when you have, for example, the former Home Secretary saying Islamists run Britain, and you have the former Vice Chair.
Well, again, I mean, Islamists don't run Britain, it's true, but obviously they are having more and more of an influence in the way that I've talked about earlier. When it is affecting your parliamentary democracy procedures, then yes, everyone should be worried. And if you weren't such a fucking hypocrite, you would be worried too. But you just completely ignore that.
The Tory party saying Sadiq Khan has handed over London to his Islamist mates. Again, let's just remind ourselves, we wouldn't tolerate this language about any other religion or faith community or minority.
Oh, bullshit. I mean, seriously, I've heard enough of Muslims go on about Jewish conspiracies and Zionists are running the country and Zionists are running London and all the rest of it. So, you actually, in the one time you were honest enough to actually criticize your own religious group, acknowledge the deep-seated anti-Semitism that runs through the Muslim community across the world. So for you to say this wouldn't be tolerated by any other group is a fucking joke.
Zach Goldsmith had beaten Sadiq Khan and was the Jewish mayor of London, and somebody in the Labour Party went out and said he's handed over London to his Zionist friends.
I mean, there's been loads of examples of Labour MPs who have come out with, anti-Semitic tropes and conspiracy theories and stuff like that. And, many of them are from Muslim backgrounds. So, really, just so dishonest.
We would be up in arms, and rightly so. You cannot just push around these kind of lazy, racist, bigoted tropes. And look,
there was nothing racist in anything that's been said about Sadiq Khan. Saying that he handed over the London to Islamists, yes, I think that was a stupid comment to make. There was nothing racist about it.
When Richard Dawkins says Islam is hostile to women and gays, number one, making a sweeping claim about billions of people is the definition of bigotry.
Yeah, he said Islam. He didn't say about every Muslim. So this just shows how dishonest you are. He is saying within the doctrines of Islam, they are very anti-gay and very anti-woman.
And number two, He says Christianity is a fundamentally decent religion. I agree with him, it is. But every religion has its extremists. Come to the United States, where I am. See what Christian nationalist politicians are doing on the abortion front, how they're criminalizing women.
I mean, this is just such an irony, just on so many levels. First of all, Richard Dawkins was talking about the UK. He wasn't talking about America. Yes, the situation is a little bit different in that you've got a larger evangelical Christian community that do try and put their religion into politics at some points. But like 2 points here. Number one, the fact is you're comparing it to things like grooming gangs, terrorism. We've got 26,000 terrorists on the watch list in the UK, which I think 3/4 are supposed to be Muslim. Prison populations, mobs driving teachers into hiding, stuff like that. All you can compare that to is the Supreme Court ruling on abortion. Now, I'm not saying that's not an important issue. I am pro-choice. I think it's good that women have the right to be able to have an abortion. But for you to compare that, like, this is the only thing anyone can bring up from the Christians in the last 30 years in America, which again doesn't apply to the UK. This is, and you're going to line it up as if that is the same as the absolute craziness that we've had come from the problems from within Islam. Just shows how deluded you are. And number two on this point, like, you were anti-abortion yourself all the way up to a couple of years ago, when suddenly it didn't fit too well with your job at MSNBC. So you had to sort of do this, oh no, apology, no, actually I'm like pro-abortion rights. It'll be funny to see you if you change that position now you're no longer working there. But I mean, for you to go on about this criminalization of women when up until 5 minutes ago you were anti-abortion yourself. So, I mean, what a fucking hypocrite yet again.
And risking their lives. Go to Africa and see what the Christian church is doing to gay communities in Africa.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly true that there's persecution and even violence against gay people from the Christian community in Africa. What's it like for gay people in the Muslim communities in Africa? I think it's a hell of a lot worse, isn't it? And what's it like in general, the situation with Boko Haram and with ISIS taking foothold and with hundreds of children, say, being kidnapped in Nigeria and the genocide that's now going on in Sudan? You really want to open that can of worms. And as I say, Dawkins was talking about Islam and Christianity in the UK, so this is a complete red herring anyway.
Religion has its extremists and bigots. Every religion is grappling with this stuff. Don't just pick on Islam, for God's sake.
Oh, listen to him. Don't just pick on Islam. Again, the professional victim. I mean, the fact is, if you would bother to criticize your own religion with a little bit more honesty, then maybe Dawkins wouldn't have to make these kinds of comments. But the point is, as I say, you can bring up one thing that's not even in the UK as if this undermines what Dawkins is saying. I mean, this is a feeble argument.
Let me just ask you on that. Okay, religion, and I'm talking about religion here. I'm not talking about culturally what we are. There is a stream across religions in which women have been oppressed and in which gay people have been oppressed. How do we have that conversation without offending people?
Oh, bollocks to offending people. What does that matter? I mean, this is the whole reason why this stuff doesn't get addressed, is because we're so worried about, particularly offended Muslims, because we're making just criticism. Oh, should I worry that you want to, oppress women or you want to murder gay people? I mean, really, we're going to worry about the offence? I mean, would these people be saying, well, we'd really love to criticise neo-Nazis, but how do we do it without offending their sensibilities? I mean, you'd laugh at that, idea, and rightly so. And yet we're going to, we've got to beg and bow and scrape, when it comes to Islamists. So fuck that.
Isn't it okay to be able to say this in the Bible or this in the Quran has perhaps led to a 100%. Situation in which people are oppressed?
100%. I'm all for that. You want to quote the Bible or the Quran, let's do it all day long. That's not what Richard Dawkins did, though, is it? Richard Dawkins went on LBC yesterday and in front of millions of people. This eminent biologist said Christianity is a fundamentally decent religion and Islam is not.
Well, again, I would disagree with the first part of this statement, but I would agree with the second part, quite frankly. And again, it's not just about the fundamentals of the religion, and I don't think they are on the whole worse in Islam, but it's the manifestations in the real world today. Most Christians in the UK are not going to cause a problem for anyone else. They're not trying to impose blasphemy laws. They're not trying to say that you have to believe in their religion. They're not saying you should be a dhimmi status if you're not a Christian. They're not saying that you should be killed if you leave Christianity. These are real world tangible differences. And there's a sizable number of Muslims who do believe in these terrible things.
If you'd gone on the radio and said Christianity is a decent religion and Judaism is not, I think you would have seen a much bigger backlash. We have normalized bigotry towards Islam in a way that we haven't against other faith communities.
Absolute horseshit. What we need to do, though, is normalize critique of Islam and the behavior of Muslims who follow this Islamist mentality, rather than running interference, which is what you do 24/7.
And I just think, we should be able to have those conversations, Anushka. I've had those conversations. I've written about homophobia and Islam. I've written.
Really? I mean, I'll be interested to see that article.
About misogyny in Islam. So I've had those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, what have you done? I mean, maybe written one article in the last 20 years and then spent the rest of your time complaining about Islamophobia.
What you don't do is you don't say Christianity is great for women, just has a few problems with female vicars.
Well, he didn't say it was great for women. He's obviously just pointing out that the problems for women within Christianity are pretty minor compared to what they are in Islam. And the fact that you can't refute that and you're just doing, again, these smarmy little comments just shows that, you're on the defensive because what he's saying is true.
Islam, meanwhile, has a hostility towards all women. That's BS. You cannot make these sweeping statements. You cannot pretend.
You can make statements about the religion itself, what the religion teaches, which is what he was doing. He didn't say all Muslims.
And one religion has some amazing record and the other religion doesn't. And
he never said that either. Again, straw man.
Rank these religions in these ways. And if you do...
No, you can rank religions in terms of their impact. And it's obvious that Islam is worse.
You need to bring much more evidence to the table than the great evidence-based...
Yeah, he wasn't asked to bring... That wasn't the nature of the conversation that Richard Dawkins was in. He's saying, we didn't bring any evidence. He was being asked generally about the situation with Islam. He wasn't, he wasn't there to start quoting portions of the Quran. And you're acting as if that couldn't be done. And this is what's so annoying about you. You'll pretend that this is not possible. I could give you 100 different verses from the Quran quite easily to show what Dawkins is saying is true.
Richard Dawkins bothered to bring.
Mehdi, thank you very, very much for your time. I really appreciate you joining us on this.
Recently...
Yeah, well, I don't, because it was absolutely pitiful. And now we're going to move into Mohammed Hijab territory. The clownery just is going to increase, so I won't even introduce it. Let's just see what he says.
Science journalist and retired zoologist Richard Dawkins has made an attempt to become relevant again in the last moments of his life.
I mean, charming, isn't it? I mean, throughout this video, right, he basically just goes on about Richard Dawkins being close to death. I mean, this is the character of Mohammed Hijab, as if we all need a reminder of that. But also notice how he starts there saying, like, he's a science journalist and zoologist, right? He's an evolutionary biologist. That's what he is. That's what he is by his trade, by his academia, by his qualifications, and by his scientific work. He's an evolutionary biologist. And the reason I'm emphasizing this at this point will become clear shortly.
By speaking about Islam. Let's take a look at the video and come back and respond in kind.
The way women are treated. I mean, Christianity is not great about that. It's had its problems.
See, again, I mean, this is really nice that this is brought up because he just said, Christianity wasn't great about that. It's had its problems. And yet, what did Mehdi Hasan say in the earlier video? He said, Richard Dawkins says that Christianity was great about women. Just shows how much these people lie all the time.
Female vicars and female bishops and things. But there's an active hostility to women, which is promoted, I think, by the holy books of Islam. I'm not talking about individual Muslims, who, of course, are quite different.
Yeah, completely reasonable statement what he's making there. He's saying that Muslims can have all sorts of different opinions on this, but the doctrines themselves are hostile to women. That's fucking well undoubtedly true.
But the doctrines of Islam, the Hadith and the Quran, is fundamentally hostile to women, hostile to gays, and I find that I like to live in a culturally Christian country, although I do not believe a single word of the Christian faith.
Let's really assess what this man is saying, because he's made a few assertions, hasn't he?
Yes, and they're all true.
And this is typical of Richard Dawkins, to make assertions and not back them with evidence. He mentioned the Quran, he mentioned the Sunnah, he mentioned the Hadith. However, He didn't actually provide any evidence of what he is saying.
Yes, because he was doing a short interview and he wasn't asked. It wasn't a religious studies lesson in that sense. But we all know we can quote various parts of the Quran about, being able to beat your wife and be able to own sex slaves and women's testimony being half of that of a man and women getting less inheritance and men basically being superior to women. Yes, we know all those verses exist. You know they exist. So to act as if, like, unless Richard Dawkins gives a whole list of them, what he said is not true, just bullshit.
Now, we all know Islam has a diametrically opposed, in many ways, view on, say, homosexuality or the morality thereof.
Yes, you think that people who are openly homosexual should be killed. Just say what you believe, Mohammed.
Than, let's say, liberal societies and so on. That's something which is taken for granted.
Again, say liberal societies. Again, I think most societies don't actually want gay people to be killed, whether they are, liberal and want gay people to have full equality, or whether there's still some kind of oppression going on there against gay people. The point is, I don't know of any others except for in the Islamic concept that really just want gay people to be straight up killed. That's just for you.
We all know that. We also know that there is some level of, if you like, a managerial hierarchy in the family setting and otherwise.
A managerial hierarchy. I mean, this is a great new apologetic for Mohammed here. I mean, yeah, sex slavery, beating your wife. This is a managerial hierarchy. I mean, fuck me. It's rare that he trumps himself in stupidity, but well done, Mo. You did it in this video.
Between men and women in Islam. But to go further than this and to say that Islam is hostile towards women, hostile towards...
I would say God sanctioning the right to beat your wife is pretty hostile.
It's gays. And then to compare it with Christianity, well, actually, the same kind of criticism from a liberal paradigm can be made about Christianity in its literal and orthodox formats, both.
Yeah, true. That is the case if you look at the Old Testament stuff. But the point is, certainly in the UK, most Christians really don't have those beliefs. Most modern Protestants and Catholics pretty much put that to the side, and they support pretty much full gay rights in this country. So that's the point. It's the manifestation. It's not just the doctrines, although the doctrines are obviously the source, but it's how it manifests, and it manifests fundamentally different between the average Muslim and the average Christian in the UK and elsewhere.
Both Catholicism and Protestantism and Judaism, in fact, regarding the two very issues that he mentioned from a liberal and feministic paradigm. So one could say that on a liberal, atheist, secular analysis, for example, the verse in Timothy which talks about the man being the head of the household, or that man shall not lie with other man, and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Those are things that you'll find in the Bible.
And it's completely irrelevant. Ask the average Christian and the average Muslim on things like women's rights and gay rights, and you are going to get a markedly different perspective between those two communities.
Compare Islam and Christianity and then to use those liberal talking points as they are.
They're not liberal talking points in that sense. They're human rights talking points, essentially. Yes, it's saying it's not really a great thing for your society to kill people who are gay or to oppress women for no reason.
Liberal talking points with small l against them is actually a weak argument, to say the least. And Richard Dawkins is a coward because he has not been able to argue his position as a zoologist, because that's what he is. I mean, why is a zoologist talking about religion anyway? Why is he talking about theology? Why is he talking about philosophy? Why is he talking about all those things in the first place?
I mean, you talk about all those things with considerably more ignorance than, well, almost anyone on the planet. He talks about those things because he's interested in those things. He doesn't claim to be an expert outside of his field. But again, you keep saying zoology as if this is like not a real scientific field. It is one of the core parts of evolutionary biology.
But let's say he does want to engage in those discussions. Instead of being brave and gallant and having the intellectual courage of standing forth in front of someone who could oppose his views and challenge them, he just makes a few sneaky remarks on...
do you mean a few sneaky remarks? I mean, he has been very open in his critique of Islam for a number of years, and I respect him for it because more of that needs to be going on. But if you noticed, you know, Mohammed Hijab never ever misses an opportunity to do one of these rage begging sessions where he is now attempting to try and get some kind of attention for himself by having a debate with Richard Dawkins. I mean, it's so pathetic.
On the radio. Well, as I say, we'll see what happens when you die, because that moment is coming soon. We could all die soon. I could die, you could die, but you're more likely to die much quicker than I because of your age. And so you should be thinking about really what's going to happen after your death. But one thing,
I think he's probably thought about that a lot, and he's not too worried about it, but since he doesn't think there is anything after death.
I will say is this. In one of your books, The Blind Watchmaker, Richard, you mentioned that there is no such thing as morality. There is no such thing as good or evil. There is only pitiless indifference. So really and truly, if you read The God Delusion, which is your seminal work, which is interesting because...
No, The God Delusion is not his seminal work. The Selfish Gene is his seminal work. It's probably a book you haven't read.
Why is a zoologist writing a seminal work on issues nothing to do with zoology or...
No, as I say, he wrote a similar work on his field, which is evolutionary biology. He happened to also write about another topic. So what?
Science. And when you spoke to Denis Noble, who is seen as one of the esteemed biologists in the United Kingdom, in fact, in the world.
Are you kidding me? Denis Noble is widely regarded in the, amongst the actual scientific community who understand evolutionary biology as a joke, essentially. You can go and look up, there's various critiques of his claims. The reason you think he's esteemed is because he's doing this kind of third way thing on evolution where he's like opening the door to creationism, which is why, people like you and Sabor all love him. But he's widely been critiqued because he's completely ignorant on evolutionary biology. And I'm going to, I'll put some links in the description to this video for some more information on this. But Denis Noble is not esteemed. He's not even an evolutionary biologist.
And he rubbished your ideas and criticized you and put you in your spot.
And he did no such thing. He doesn't really understand the topic. If you go and look at some of the critiques of Denis Noble, they show he does seem to have a fundamental lack of understanding because, again, he is one of these people talking outside of his field, but he's trying to make scientific claims about evolutionary biology, which, again, have been widely denounced.
And humiliated you intellectually. And he, in fact, is the one who invented this label science journalist vis-a-vis you and your efforts.
Yeah, I mean, this is ironic. I mean, the guy's going on about it's like 5 years older than Dawkins. He retired like 20 years ago. He doesn't even work in the field of evolutionary biologist when he was a scientist. And yet you're like acting as if he's like some kind of authority on this. He's not, to anyone who's not a religious fundamentalist.
You really couldn't withstand that kind of criticism. But if you read your book, The God Delusion, most of it is actually attacks are based on morality. But if you do not believe in an objective morality and that everything is pitiless indifference, so whether...
Yeah, well, it doesn't matter whether he believes in objective morality or not. He obviously does believe in morality. So therefore, it's perfectly reasonable for him to make criticisms of Islam.
One is hostile to gays, one is hostile to women, one is hostile to men or children or animals or anyone else.
Yeah, all demonstrably true in Islam.
That is, according to you, pitiless indifference. It doesn't matter.
No, he's talking about the universe as a whole. He's saying there is no kind of universal morality. The universe doesn't care about good or evil. It's basically, it's going to unfold the way it's going to unfold. Doesn't care about the suffering of human beings, etc. Obviously, he understands that human beings do have the capacity and therefore do have morality ourselves. So again, this is just such a stupid strawman argument.
If they are, hostile or not hostile, peaceful or hostile, doesn't matter. Finally,
of course it matters. It matters to human beings.
I will say this. The entitlement in your speech is quite clear. For you to speak in this way and to think of the United Kingdom as kind of like your garden or your backyard, I wouldn't want to see this there and I wouldn't see that there. It shows you that you don't actually have respect for the democratic process.
I mean, really, the irony of that statement. I mean, you openly want there to be no democracy in this country. You want to live under a dictatorship of sharia. Now, he does have respect for democracy. Therefore, he's going to criticize the elements which are trying to destroy that democracy, people like you.
She kept asking you, what if, Britain became a Muslim majority country, so on and so forth. I mean, if you cared about the principles of democracy and so on and
Yeah, if you cared about those principles, you would oppose Islamist thugs like yourself.
so forth, then you would actually answer in a way which would be commensurate with that. You'd say, well, if that's the will of the majority of this and that, which shows you.
No. Again, that's not the whole point about democracy. Is that yes, if you have threats to it, like Nazism, like Stalinism, like Islamism, then yes, you fight against them. I mean, we fought World War II kind of over that issue, Mohammed. So it's kind of important that in order to defend democracy, you have to fight against those who are actively trying to destroy it. There's no contradiction there. It's the only way it can be done.
That you cannot avoid the in-group, out-group tribal dynamics. In your last days on this planet, probably.
Again, going back to this whole thing of him dying with that creepy look on his face. I mean, it really is a nasty character.
Or weeks, if you're lucky. Months, maybe.
See, I mean, this almost seems like you're breaking YouTube's terms of services here, because this almost sounds like you're wishing death on someone. So, I mean, I would really be careful doing this line, because you can get your video taken down and channel strikes for this, and it'll be great if that happens to you.
In those last moments of your withering life, you've decided to attach yourself culturally with a religion that you've spent a long time trying to oppose, which is Christianity.
No, he's basically asking the question, number one, would it cause the country to be worse if it was, culturally Muslim rather than culturally Christian? And even more importantly, if it was based on religious law. And that's obviously the case, yes. And he's saying that in terms of the cultural heritage, he thinks it's better to have had a country that went through Christianity. Now, whether you agree with him or not, I personally think it's a reasonable argument to make based on the doctrines of the religious faiths and based on their current expressions in the modern world. You haven't actually given anything to refute what he said. Just like Mehdi Hasan, it's just all talk, no substance.
Which shows a lot about you. Finally, I will say the debate offer has always been put on the table to you, Richard. We've always said if you really want to speak about Islam, the Muslim community is willing to have that conversation.
No, what you're actually saying is that you want to debate because you want attention and you want the clout and you want the clicks. But just like everybody else who you've begged for attention from, I'd be surprised if Richard Dawkins even knows who you are. I mean, you titled this video something like, it's his last dash for fame or something. He is clearly more famous than you. I mean, yes, you've got your supporters amongst Orthodox Salafi type Muslims. Yes, you're famous amongst them. Richard Dawkins is considerably more famous internationally and considerably more respected, as he should be, even amongst theists. So, I mean, it's just this desperate begging for attention, which you did. How many times are you going to do this? I mean, you did it with Douglas Murray, you did it with Neil deGrasse Tyson, done it with Sam Harris, you did it with Richard Dawkins. I mean, the only one who was naive enough to fall for this was Jordan Peterson, and he's kept his distance since your stupid interviews with him. So, you're not going to get a debate, mate, because he probably doesn't even know who the fuck you are.
And before you die, maybe you'd want to summon the testicular fortitude, although maybe that has withered as well.
See how creepy he is. Again, this is supposed to be, the depiction of Islamic morality, and he's going on about Dawkins' withered balls. I mean, he always does this creepy sexualization, and it does really open up some questions about his mindset and what Mohammed might be into, because he does this in so many videos and he's always got that horrible look on his face.
To do so. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Yeah, so there you go. I mean, two people who are completely dishonest in the way that they frame this. Richard Dawkins basically saying what I think is the truth. Yes, the UK has a Christian cultural heritage, and the way this has played out, much better that it has that basis than something based on the kind of world that Mohammed Hijab or Mehdi Hasan would want, one where it's based on Islam. I think it's obvious that it would be worse. And even if he's wrong on that, he's entitled to his opinion. I mean, everyone called him Islamophobic and stuff like that. It's absolute bullshit. But I think the claims he's made are demonstrable. And the reactions to it is pathetic, whether you are Mehdi Hasan, pretend journalist, or Mohammed Hijab, wannabe gangster. It's the same victimhood, the same kind of pretending that he hasn't made points which aren't true, and it's laughable. Anyways, hope you all enjoyed. I will have another video up very soon. I'll see you in that next one.